Oh God, this is still blue. I didn't wash anything. God, I'm an idiot. Oh no, this brush is all whooped up too. I gotta start cleaning my brushes. I'm lazy. Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I was gonna be doing a video on Pizzagate, but I started researching it and I decided it was too politically charged and it's really just not something I want to talk about right now. There's just too much. It's too much. So I decided that today we're going to be talking about something called Mel's hole. Get your mind out of the gutter. It's not a butthole. So Mel's hole was first heard about. Listen, I'm going to try and do my eyebrows. I've been doing them beforehand because I'm really bad at doing my eyebrows and talking at the same time, but I didn't get a chance to do them. So I'm going to try to do this and talk at the same time. It's not going to go well, I don't think, but we're gonna give it a shot. So Mel's hole. It was first heard about in 1997 when a man named Mel Waters called into a radio show called Coast to Coast AM, hosted by the famous Art Bell. Coast to Coast AM is a late night talk show that features tales of the unexplained, most of them being paranormal topics. And it was very popular. People loved listening to it and they probably still would had Art Bell not passed away recently. When did he die?
2018.
Yeah, that's recent. So Mel Waters claimed that he discovered a bottomless pit on his property near Ellensburg, Washington state. He used this hole on his property as his own personal dumping hole. Get your mind out of the gutter, guys. Come on. He wasn't pooping in it. It was for trash, you dirtballs. Funny side note, my papa, behind his house there was this huge, hole. It wasn't like a hole, but it was like a big, massive, there was just a big hill basically with a bunch of trees down in this very large pit. We could see the bottom though, that's the difference. And we used to throw a bunch of crap down there. There were couches down there, tires. We didn't care. We didn't want it, throw it in the hole. Anyways, Mel started noticing that the things that he threw in this hole, he could never hear them hit the bottom. That led him to believe that this was a bottomless pit. He threw things like TVs in there, refrigerators, and you would think you could hear a refrigerator hit the bottom, even if it was really far away. But he never did, not even once. So Mel started experimenting. Being a former shark fisherman, he decided to take a roll of lifesavers on his fishing line, tie it, and put it down the hole to see what would happen to the lifesavers. He got down to about 1,500 feet. He left the lifesavers there for long enough to see if they would come up dissolve from water or something like that. And then he pulled the candy back up. The candy remained intact. There was no sign of any dissolving happening. His second experiment was done by tying a 1-pound lead weight to the end of his fishing line. He would just keep tying new spools to the end of each of them over and over and over again until he reached 80,000 feet of fishing line, and there was still no sign that he reached the bottom. The tension of the wire was still tense. Now, if you look it up, 80,000 feet is 15 miles long. That's long. AF. He said that the pit had a lot of strange properties, one of which being when he yelled into the hole, there was no echo. He also said that his neighbor's dog passed away, so they just threw the dead body in the hole. What a way to memorialize your past pet. Now, what was strange about this is that a few days later, Mel claims to have seen this dog running around in the woods, and the reason he knew it was the same dog is because it had the same collar on. Mel also had dogs, but his dogs were too scared to get anywhere near the hole. They were terrified of it. They were very loyal dogs though, and they followed Mel everywhere he went, so it was weird that they would stop and they wouldn't go anywhere near the hole even when Mel was near it. Mel would try and lead his dogs near the hole with leashes, which is kind of cruel if you think about it. If you know that your dog doesn't want to go near something, why would you try and force it? But who am I to judge? But when he would try to do this, the dogs would actually dig their paws into the ground and wouldn't budge. They would not let him take them near the hole without putting up a fight. He also says that at one point he brought his portable radio with him near the hole, And when he turned it on, the radio station wasn't playing this normal songs that it usually did. It was playing like old music, and you could hear really strange noises and like voices too. So these were all the claims that he made during his first interview on Coast to Coast AM. He called into Coast to Coast AM several times after his first interview, once in 2000 and another time in 2002. He had more and more to add to his story each time he called. From black beams shooting out of the hole to metals magically turning into other metals when they were held close to the hole. According to Mel, federal agents heard about this hole on the radio interview that he gave, and they came to seize his land. He says that the day after his interview aired on the radio, he was walking towards the hole on his land, and a man in a fancy suit approached him. Behind him, he saw several other men in like fancy biohazard suits. They looked official. The man told Mel that the area was closed off due to an airplane crash. But like it was on his property and he didn't hear anything, nor did he see any smoke or any signs of a crash happening. So he was like, nah, B, I'm going on my land. I need to go over there. Mel was growing medicinal herbs on his property. You know what that means. He was warned by the official dude that a drug lab could easily be found on his property and that he needs to stand down. So Mel threatened to go to the press. They ended up offering him $250,000 a month to lease his property. So he obviously agreed. Why would you not agree to something like that? He was like, hell yeah. You don't gotta ask me twice. And he used this money to move to Australia. End of story. The end. Thanks. Come again next time. They agreed to let him bring his dogs and some of his medicinal plants with him, which was apparently against regulation, so they were desperate to have him off of this property. They paid him every single month on time, $250,000 flat. They did this between the months of March of 97 and December of 99. Mel ended up opening a wombat rescue and research facility in Australia. Isn't that so cute? Like, of all the things he could do, he decided to open a wombat rescue. I like Mel. He's sweet. But in December of 99, Mel returned back to the United States to visit family. And while he was back, he ended up doing another Coast to Coast AM show because a lot happened that he needed to update us on. Son of a biscuit. It's fine. The government ended up serving him a legal document stating that he was in violation of some building codes on his property, and they seized his land from him, like, permanently. No more leasing. The land was not his anymore. Sometime after this happened, Mel experienced a really weird event. He was on a bus on his way to Olympia, Washington. He was on his way either to or from helping his nephew move, and on the bus an altercation occurred, and when the police arrived they asked Mel for a statement. Mel said he didn't want to give one, and they were like, okay, well, do you want to ride home? And he was like, sure, I'll take a ride home. So he got in the van that they offered him a ride home in, and that's the last thing he remembers. Next thing he knows, he's waking up in an alley in San Francisco. This was 12 days later. He was badly beaten, his molars were missing out of his mouth, and there was evidence that he was hooked up to an IV. Sound familiar? Do we remember the alien abduction story? Mel's belt buckle was also missing, which he thought was very strange. Mel would make homemade belt buckles out of some coins that he found on his property. One day when he was out exploring his property or farming or, using his medicinal plants, he found a traditional Chinese New Year's envelope that contained lucky money. This lucky money ended up being United States currency. It was dimes. So he would make belts out of these dimes, and he ended up selling a few to some of the locals around him. So we'll get back to the coins in a minute. After he woke up, he checked his bank account, and all of the money that he had been paid from the government, or what was left of it, was missing out of his account. Can you say suspicious? He also noticed that his wombat rescue was dismantled and his employees laid off. Mel went back on Coast to Coast AM to tell everyone what happened to him. He ended up tracking down one of the customers that bought one of his belt buckles, because he wanted to examine the coins that he used to make them. He was just so curious why his belt buckle was stolen during this mishap. He noticed that the dime said it was made in 1943, which was weird because Roosevelt's face was on this dime, and there were no coins made in 1943 with Roosevelt's face on them. Also, every United States coin is marked with a letter. This letter represents what city they were minted in, which means what city they were made in. These coins were marked with a B, and there are no known cities, or there were no known cities in 1943 that started with B that would have minted a coin. Mark it with a B. Put it in the oven for a baby and me. So the owner of this coin, the man who bought the belt buckle from Mel, took it to a coin expert. The coin expert did not have an explanation for it, but he offered him a large amount of money to buy the coin from him. The man ended up telling him that he would think about it. He wasn't sure if he wanted to sell it or not yet. Before he could even make a decision, the Treasury Department came to his home and took the coin from him. Confiscated. Later on, a hyperdimensional physics theorist named Richard Hoagland said he thought that the coin may have come from another dimension, an alternate universe. It's also noted that Mel's wife went missing, or his ex-wife. There was no trace of her to be found anywhere. She just vanished. Before moving to Australia, Mel lived on his property for 2 years. So that's not super long time, but he knew the old owners of the property, and they were there for 30 to 40 years before him. And according to them, that hole was there long before they ever even moved in. Ugh, I have crusty under eyes. I hate getting old. I'm crusty. I'm decrepit. I'm over it. And then it was actually found that there was no trace of anyone named Mel Waters anywhere near or in Ellensburg, Washington at all. Some believed that he changed his name on purpose to hide his identity. Hate it. Whatever. Mel, or whatever his name is, never specified where this hole was specifically. Many have tried to find this hole, but few have been able to find it. One person who claims to have seen it is Gerald Osborne, also known as Red Elk. He told reporters in 2012 that he had visited the hole many times since 1961, and that he knows that there's a military base there where they research alien activity, a top secret base at that. He led an expedition in 2002 of 30 people, but they couldn't find the hole. Mel swore on the Bible that his story was true. I just bit my lip. Ouch. Do you ever just use one brush for like the same product? Like, I'm gonna use this for my bronzer and my blush. You know why? Because I can. Now, whether or not Mel believes in God is another topic of discussion for another time. So who knows how much that really means that he swears on the Bible. Also, I know I hold my hand up like this sometimes when I do makeup. I don't know why I do that, and I never noticed until I started filming myself doing makeup. I'm weird, just don't mind me. Mel ended up placing a metal lid on top of the hole when he lived there for safety reasons with a lock. When Mel went on air for the last time, people kind of started questioning his story. People started thinking, okay, this story is getting a little too crazy now. Because his story just kept getting nutsier and nutsier as he went. But on air, he asked Art Bell if he knew what the Terra server was. Now, Terra server was back then kind of like Google Earth, and it became available to the public in December of 1997, 8 months after his first appearance on Coast to Coast AM. Mel told everyone on air that if you searched the coordinates of his property in the public domain of these images, you would see a map of his area and his property was blocked out. Just a big old white square right over top of where his property would be. Why? Why would that be? So people started believing him again. Because during the commercial break, everyone went online, obviously, and checked it to see if it was true, and it was. It was true. So they were like, oh shit, he's right. He's not lying. I believe him again. Mel also stated that after one of his earlier radio appearances, a TV crew went to Ellensburg, Washington, and they claimed that they saw evidence of a heavy military presence had being there. That didn't even make sense what I just said, did it? of a heavy military presence being there. Mel also claims that after talking with people at a truck stop nearby, a bunch of them claim to have seen a black beam of light shooting up into the sky from the same area that the hole is in. Some described this light as actually anti-light. Another trucker friend of his actually claimed to have delivered a large amount of fiber optic equipment and materials to a warehouse in Ellensburg to a group of Israelis. Is that the right word, Israelis? I don't want to offend anyone.
Israelis.
That's right? That's okay. I don't know what prominence that even has, but that's what it says, okay? Don't come at me. Another trucker that he knew claimed to deliver a large amount of crated instruments from a lab in San Francisco to that same warehouse in Ellensburg that the first trucker delivered his load to. That sounds wrong. That the first trucker delivered his shipment to. The lab that these crates came from are known for working on projects for the United States military. Does San Francisco ring a bell to anyone? That's where Mel woke up after getting into that weird van. Mel also claims to have found a second hole in Nevada. After hearing Mel's story on the radio, a group of Native Americans emailed Mel and they invited him to their reservation to talk about arts and crafts and his knowledge of medicinal herbs and plants. Mel accepted their invitation and he went to visit them in September of 2001. They were an impoverished group of people who had a lot of experience dealing with medicinal herbs and plants and also natural medicines. And they wanted to talk to Mel about his experience and his research that he had done with his own medicinal plants. Mel ended up telling them that the plants that he grew on his property near the hole were the best plants he had ever grown. They did the best. They were the healthiest plants that he ever grew. He described these plants that did so well on his property, and he asked the Native Americans if they knew what he was talking about, if they were familiar with this variety of plant that he grew. So they brought him to an area to show him what they thought he might be talking about. And what does he see there? Drum roll, please. Another hole. It was right smack in the middle of this little village of Basque families. Basques are a small ethnic group of people who come from a very small region in Europe. This was public land that they decided to start raising sheep on and create their own little village. They ended up telling Mel that the hole had been there from before they decided to inhabit the land, which was in the 1700s. So that hole has been there for a long, long time. Sorry, the 1800s, not the 1700s. Still a long time. These people believed this hole to be a spiritual hole. What that means exactly, I'm not sure. Never really heard of a spiritual hole, but whatever gives you hope at the end of the day, you know? To each their own. Whatever floats your boat. This hole that was there was 9 feet wide, just like the hole on Mel's property. This hole was different though. Instead of having been surrounded by a stone retaining wall, this hole had a metal rim and a metal lining as far down as you could see. The metal radiated heat, but the people described it as heat that is not like heat that we know. Whatever that means. What other kind of heat is there? But okay, we'll go with it. This hole also had very strange properties, similar to the properties that the hole that Mel knows of had. It would cancel out noise. Mel's hole, there was no echo. This hole, if you got near it, noise would just disappear. Noise that's made directly above this hole, you can't hear it at all. It's gone. Even if you hit the metal with something hard, it wouldn't make a peep. Quiet as a mouse. Quieter than a mouse. Just like the hole on Mel's property, animals were terrified of this hole as well. Like I said, these people raised sheeps, and the sheeps isn't a word, is it? These people raised sheep, and the sheep did not like going near this hole. The villagers also claimed to have seen a similar kind of black beam of anti-light coming out of this hole as well, just like the other hole. So Mel and the villagers decided to do some experimenting. The first experiment they conducted was to lower a bucket of ice down into the hole. Now they kept another bucket of ice near them above the hole as a control bucket. When the control bucket of ice was halfway melted, That's when they decided to lift the bucket that was in the hole from the hole. They quickly pulled the ice bucket up and inspected it, and what they found was that this ice had not melted, it was still fully intact, and it was lukewarm, but not melted. Mel also claimed that even when he held this ice in his hand, it still didn't melt. The second experiment they conducted was trying to melt this ice over a fire. The ice did not melt. It actually caught on fire, but it wasn't like a normal flame. It was a heat-producing flame, but it was more like a flicker. And this flicker stayed lit for months, allegedly. And during Mel's interview, when he said this, he said that as far as he knew, that flame was still burning as he spoke, right there in that moment on air. One of the villagers actually used this ice to warm his cabin in the winter months. You use what you got, you know? You gotta do what you gotta do. They tried to reproduce these results of this experiment by repeating the experiment, and it only worked about 1/3 of the time, but they were able to reproduce the results of this experiment, just not every time. One of the villagers wanted to be lowered into the hole to see what would happen to him, but everyone talked him out of it because of what happened to the ice. So instead, they decided to use a sheep. How rude. Can you say animal cruelty? I do not endorse this part of the story, by the way. I think this is so messed up, and I hate this part of the story. Just as a disclaimer. So this was their third experiment. They decided to bring the sheep, and the sheep did not want to go near this hole. It put a fight up so hard that it actually got away. The people were committed though. They wanted to go through with this experiment, and so they knocked the sheep out. After the sheep was passed out, they put the sheep in a crate and waited for the sheep to come to put the sheep in the hole. The sheep was going crazy inside this crate. It was screaming blood-curdling screams, the kind of screams that would give you nightmares if you ever heard it. So glad I wasn't there. Kind of wish I was though, so I could tell them to knock it the hell off and leave this poor innocent sheep alone. So they ended up putting the sheep over the pit, and as soon as the sheep went over the pit, you couldn't hear the sheep anymore. Now, if that's not the creepiest thing I ever heard, imagine seeing that, like a sheep screaming so loud that it would traumatize you for the rest of your life, and then you put it over a pit and it's still freaking out in the crate, you just can't hear it. That's scary. That's so creepy. Is that creepy? The sheep was thrashing around this crate as they lowered him in, or her, about halfway down from 1,500 feet. That's how far down they were going to lower the sheep, 1,500 feet. Halfway down, the sheep started being still. It wasn't thrashing anymore, and it was still. But they continued to lower the sheep to the full 1,500 feet. As soon as the crate reached the 1,500 foot mark, Mel and the villagers started feeling a weird fuzzy vibration coming from the metal rim. They left the sheep down in the hole for 30 minutes and then pulled the sheep back up. When they got the sheep to the top, the sheep looked to be normal, but it was dead. Still appeared normal though, no visible oddities on his body. So they took the sheep and they placed it on a table nearby and decided to do an autopsy, basically. They cut the sheep open and the inside of the sheep looked to have been cooked. So this was experiment number 4, the dissection of the sheep. They also found a large tumorous growth inside the sheep. There was a strange gel surrounding the tumor. They removed this growth and it was a pulsating, fleshy sac. Disgusting. They cut it open and a creature came out of this thing. It was attached to this growth by an umbilical cord, and it emerged out of this growth. It was about 18 inches long, and it looked like a baby that a seal and a fetus made together. That's how they described it. It had flippers and human eyes. It was alive and staring at all of them. Then it proceeded to chew itself off of the umbilical cord. Mel said that he thought that this felt like it was a miracle. I mean, I don't know about you, but that's probably the last thing I would think if I saw a weird alien creature gnawing its way off of an umbilical cord of a tumor that came out of a dead sheep that we pulled out of a weird pit. But that's just me. One of the villagers suggested that they kill it, but Mel would not let that happen. The creature crawled to the edge of the table and looked up at Mel, who felt connected to this creature. So Mel picked the creature up and placed it on the ground gently. On his hands, there was like a slimy residue left from where he was holding the creature. And he said that it smelled like ozone. What does ozone smell like? Here's another smell. The smell of rotting flesh. We talked about this before. Who knows what the hell ozone smells like? Does ozone even have a smell? What does an ozone smell like? If you know what ozone smells like, please tell me in the comments because I would love to know. So they stood around for 2 hours just kind of watching this thing. It ended up laying down on its stomach and just staring back at them. It was just observing them as if it had a higher intelligence. Because it did. It was a baby alien. Mel says that the gaze that this creature had with everyone was the most compassionate gaze that he had ever seen. That's how he perceived it to be. So they weren't scared of this thing. It seemed like this thing was kind-hearted and nice and meant them no harm. The creature then went towards the hole, where Mel helped it up to the metal rim. It gave Mel a slow nod like, thanks, bud, and then turned and jumped back into the pit of hell where it came from. The villagers decided to put the remains of the sheep in the hole as well. They all said that they felt emotionally drained and very deeply moved after this experience. Mel also says that in late August, right before his trip to this village, he was diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live. After returning home from the village, the cancer was gone, and he believes that this creature healed him. Before Mel left Nevada, he said that one of the villagers, an older man, told him that he always had believed that the hole was a spiritual thing, and he was not at all surprised by what they experienced there. Before going off to bed, the man pressed something into Mel's hand and told him to put it in his pocket. Mel didn't look at it, but the next day when he woke up, he took it out of his pocket. He went to bed in the same pants, apparently. That's nasty. But whatever, we're gonna ignore that part. He pulled it out of his pocket, and what was it? It was something that the man told him he had found near the hole a while ago, and he wanted him to have it. It was a 1943 dime with Roosevelt's face on it. Weird. In December of 2002, Mel appeared on Coast to Coast AM once again, and he updated the listeners on his whole saga. He reported that helicopters started flying over the second hole that they found after his interview aired where he mentioned the second hole. The villagers told Mel that the metal rim around the hole becomes invisible when you get to a certain distance from it. The dime also disappears when you get within 15 feet of it, and it doesn't show up on camera or through a digital scanner. Mel reported that the man who was using the ice to warm his cabin in the winter started experiencing some strange side effects. He felt extremely thirsty all the time. His skin was dry and the air was extremely dry. So he attempted boiling water on the stove to try and throw some humidity out into the air, but he noticed that the stove seemed to be absorbing all of the steam that was getting put into the air. One day, the man came back to his house to find that his stove had fallen through his floor and it was sunken 1 foot into the ground underneath the flooring of his home. So he covered all the openings of the broken floor so not to let cold air in, and continued using the stove as heat. Like I said, you gotta do what you gotta do. If that keeps his house warm, you gotta just keep doing it. A week or two passed by after using the stove still after it fell through, and then he came back to his house one day and his house was no longer. It was just a big pile of sawdust. At this point, he decided to move in with his brother because where else was he gonna go? He didn't have a house anymore. About a month later though, he decided to go back and visit where his cabin once was. When he got there, he noticed that the stove was about 5 feet deep in the ground at this point, and the sides of the ground where the walls were of this hole were a glassy, smooth material. Mel ended up contacting one of the officials that originally approached him when he tried to go to the hole the first time, when his land got seized and stuff, remember that? He called them because he was worried for the villagers' safety. So the official got in touch with the villager guy and ended up coming out to take a look. The villager led him to where his old cabin was and showed him the stove and everything. Come on, you gotta tell me when there's lipstick on my teeth.
I didn't see it.
I got lipstick on my teeth. How long has that been there? So the villager leaves, but he doesn't actually leave. He goes and he hides behind a tree in like the hills that are nearby, but close enough that he can see what's going on over there. What he says he saw is a group of military or scientists with cranes and heavy, large machinery. They kept bringing bigger and bigger cranes and machinery in because they could not get this stove out of the ground. Eventually, they end up dropping chains into the hole. They poured water over them, and with multiple cranes, were finally able to get this thing out of the ground. They loaded the stove onto what the man said was the largest truck he had ever seen in his entire life, and they drove away. Mel also claimed in this update on the air that he thought he was being followed. There's still lipstick on my teeth. You guys gotta tell me when there's lipstick on my teeth. He said that people that he had wanted to get in touch with and talk with would randomly end up showing up on his property first to talk to him. And he said that he is not an easy guy to find. He has really kind of hunkered down and tried to make himself low profile. He doesn't want to be found. The villagers also told Mel that the creature that they found inside the sheep had returned several times since the first time they saw it. They found a way to communicate with it using one of their boom boxes. They tried to record the conversations that they had with this creature, but the only thing that showed up on the tapes after recording were weird, random, pulsating tones. Mel thinks that this creature was a rock flyer, which is a legend in Native American culture. They believe that these creatures live beneath the earth and have the ability to travel between multiple earths. This creature warned the villagers that the ice that they discovered could easily destroy the earth if it was not used properly. It also said that it anticipated that humanity would self-destruct with nuclear war, and that they plan to move in once we're gone and use the ice on our planet. In the right way though, because they know how to use it. And that was the last update from Mel Waters. We haven't heard anything since then. 5 years after Mel's last interview, in 2005, Art Bell had a guest come onto his show, Coast to Coast AM, named Kimberly. Kimberly was from Manitoba, Canada, and she claimed that she found a hole that was pretty similar to the holes that Mel described. She said that one of her ancestors was in the Canadian military and was stationed near Manitoba in the 1700s. Her ancestor claimed that the natives showed him this hole and then he seized their land. According to the natives' legend, this hole was where the earth spirits dwelled. And those are quotes. These spirits would come up from the hole from time to time, and you could even hear them sometimes. What they sounded like though, I don't know. She didn't tell us. So Kimberly's father eventually inherited this land and they would go camping there in the summertime. And she claimed to remember investigating this hole with her brother. They interpreted this hole to have been around 30 feet wide, which was a lot larger than Mel's holes. Mel's holes that he found were 9 feet. Kimberly and her brother claimed that surrounding this hole wasn't metal, it wasn't a rock retaining wall, it was marble. Fancy, right? This one's just over the top, 30 feet long. Marble exterior, it's on its A game. Bougie. This marble though was so hard that it couldn't be damaged or scratched. They tried. They tried hitting it with heavy objects, hard objects, hammers, and nothing would happen to it. They also dug around the edge and found it to be about 2 feet deep. They also claimed that there was a 50-yard circumference around this hole where wildlife and noises could not be heard from inside. Sounds pretty familiar, huh? Near this hole, they also claim to have found dead animals, mutilated with their organs removed. Dirty, disgusting. But you know what that sounds like? Skinwalker Ranch. They would also throw things down the hole. Apparently holes have like a calling, like, hey, throw things in me, please. They want things to get thrown into them. They threw flashlights in there, but they could not see the end of this thing. They couldn't hear anything hitting the bottom, much like Mel's hole. Mel's holes. So one night, her and her brother slept near the hole. The whole night, they heard humming noises like a machine or something. She said that they could feel the vibrations of this humming in their bodies. Her ancestors' stories were passed down year after year, and they also claimed to have seen lights in the sky around where this hole was. They would also find strange artifacts nearby. She says that her family still possesses a little smooth ebony pyramid that was found near the hole. They also have little metallic objects that were found near the hole as well. Kimberly says that the only way to get to this hole is by hiking for an hour through her family's land. This was the last interview in general about this topic ever. We haven't heard anything about these holes since Kimberly's interview on Coast to Coast AM. Many people think that this is all made up because there's no evidence that Mel Waters ever even existed. There's no record of him having owned a property anywhere near Ellensburg, Washington. But then there's others that believe that Mel changed his name purposely so that he couldn't be tracked. And then others believe that a powerful group of people could have easily hidden records of Mel. They didn't want people to know that Mel really existed. They wanted this all to be covered up, swept under the rug. Government cover up. Again, guys, all these stories just like tie in together for me. There's so many similar elements in all these stories that I've been telling. It makes you really think. I think I'm gonna have to take a trip to either Manitoba or Ellensburg or Nevada. Private Investigator Gutierrez, at your service. Who wants to come with me? Let me know in the comments, because I'm going. I always wonder, like, why don't we put more money into like exploring outer space? Why don't we put more money into figuring out what else is out there in the universe? There's so much more to life than Earth, I think. That's just my opinion. Thanks for sticking with me. I know this was a long one, but still super interesting as always. I hope you guys join me next time. Thank you so much for watching. Cut! That's a wrap, people!
So what is this about? Water's hole?
Mel's hole.
Mel's hole.
Mel's hole. His butthole gets possessed.
Stop.
Sometimes I think Will's butthole is possessed.